Every family has its own story, but not every story can move the hearts of others. This story begins on a winter morning under a gray sky that seemed to forewarn of something ominous. In a small rural village on the hillside, two brothers, Henry and Andrew, grew up in an old wooden house. It was once filled with laughter, but now it resonated only with whispers of worry and uncertainty. Henry, the older brother, was 28 years old, but his weathered appearance made him look much older. His face, darkened by the sun, bore deep-set eyes that carried countless untold stories. Andrew, the younger brother, was only 17, a bright, quick-witted boy with big dreams of leaving their impoverished village to attend university in the city. But their family was unlike others. Their parents had died in a car accident when Andrew was just 7 years old, leaving the two brothers to fend for themselves. Henry, barely 18 at the time, had to abandon his dream of going to university and took on every grueling job he could find. Construction work, heavy lifting, even mining, just to ensure Andrew could continue his education. Henry never complained, nor did he harbor resentment. "Andrew, you have to live the life I couldn't," he would say. "I don't need anything else, as long as you achieve your dreams." Those words might have seemed simple, but they were a promise Henry had planted deep in his heart, like an unyielding tree standing firm against every storm. That winter, Andrew received an acceptance letter to a top university in the big city. The news was like a rare ray of sunlight piercing through the cold, but it also marked the beginning of a series of tragedies. The tuition fees and living expenses in the city were astronomical for the two brothers. Despite working tirelessly day and night, Henry couldn't save enough money. "I can't let you miss this chance," Henry muttered in the dark, his calloused hands clenched so tightly that they bled. And then he made a decision no one could have predicted. He turned to loan sharks. Henry approached Mr. Dalton, a notorious moneylender feared by everyone in the village. "If you don't pay back on time, I'll take your house as collateral. Don't forget that," Mr. Dalton warned with a cold, piercing gaze. Henry didn't hesitate. He signed the paper, unaware that this decision was the beginning of a stormy and perilous journey. The unanswered questions linger. Can Henry bear the cost of his daring choice? And what will Andrew do when he learns of his brother's silent sacrifices? Henry kept the loan a secret. He didn't want Andrew to worry or feel guilty. To Henry, the most important thing was for Andrew to have a chance to change his life. As for himself, it didn't matter. "Andrew, focus on studying hard. Leave the money worries to me," Henry said with a faint smile. Andrew didn't suspect anything, but he felt uneasy seeing his brother grow more and more haggard. Still, he reassured himself that as long as he graduated and secured a stable job, everything would be fine. With the loan from Mr. Dalton, Henry had no choice but to take on more work. During the day, he worked as a laborer at a wood shop. At night, he hauled heavy loads at a wholesale market. Despite the pain that racked his entire body, he never stopped. But the interest piled up relentlessly. 2 months later, one evening, Mr. Dalton sent his men to their house. They stood at the door, armed with sticks, their voices menacing. "Where's Henry? Get out here. If you don't pay up, you'll see what happens." It was then that Andrew learned the truth. He froze, staring at the threatening figures in the dark. Henry stepped outside, his gaze steady, though deep down he was terrified. "Give me more time. I'll pay it all," he said, his voice trembling. But Mr. Dalton wasn't so lenient. "1 month, no more. If you don't pay, I'll take your house, and I swear you won't have a place to live." Andrew felt as if the ground had fallen out from beneath him. He rushed to his room and locked the door, his thoughts in turmoil. "It's all because of me," he blamed himself. From that day on, Henry worked even harder. He even took on dangerous jobs like illegal logging in the deep forest. One stormy night, he narrowly escaped death when a tree fell, surviving only by sheer luck. After days of agonizing over the situation, Andrew decided he had to do something. He secretly took on part-time jobs in the city, even though it left him with no time to study. Occasionally, he sent money home, but it barely made a dent in the enormous debt. When Henry found out, he lashed out. "What do you think you're doing? Your responsibility is to study. Don't let me see you wasting this opportunity. But you're sacrificing everything for me. I can't just sit by and do nothing." Andrew burst into tears. "Don't you understand? I'm your brother. This is my responsibility. The final month to repay the debt approached, and Mr. Dalton began to escalate his threats. One night, he sent his men to vandalize the wood shop where Henry worked, causing him to lose his job. With no source of income, Henry fell into despair. For the first time in his life, Henry had to confront his own helplessness. He sat on the steps of their home, staring into the dark yard, which seemed as bleak as his future. Just then, Andrew returned from the city, his eyes filled with determination. "Henry, I'm dropping out of school. We'll work together to pay off the debt." "No, absolutely not," Henry shouted, his voice filled with anger. "But you can't take it anymore," Andrew yelled back, tears streaming down his face. "We're brothers. You don't have to carry all this alone." The two fell into silence, the only sound being the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. In his desperation, Henry received an offer from an acquaintance to transport contraband across the border. The payment would be enough to clear the debt, but if caught, he could face a lifetime in prison. This is the only way to keep the house and protect Andrew, Henry thought, his heart aching. In the end, he decided to accept. But just as he was preparing, Andrew discovered his plan. "You can't do this. If you get caught, what will happen to me?" Andrew cried out. "I'm doing this for you. If I don't, we'll lose everything," Henry shouted back. Will Henry continue down this dangerous path, or will he find another way out? And what will Andrew do to save his brother from this relentless cycle of hardship? The day before Henry was set to pick up the package for the dangerous smuggling trip, he felt like a man standing at a crossroads. His conscience screamed at him, but the piercing gaze of Mr. Dalton and his relentless threats had backed him into a corner. Meanwhile, Andrew refused to sit idly by. He went around the village, seeking help from the elders, hoping to find a way to save his brother. But all he got were pitying looks. "Do you think we don't know what it means to owe Mr. Dalton? Henry's as good as finished," one man said, his voice devoid of hope. Andrew wouldn't give up. He turned to an old acquaintance of their parents, Mr. Thompson, a former army officer now living a reclusive life in the neighboring village. After hearing the story, Mr. Thompson sighed deeply. "Do you really think you can change anything? Dalton isn't someone you can deal with easily." "I can't let Henry destroy his life," Andrew responded firmly. Seeing the determination in Andrew's eyes, Mr. Thompson gave a faint, sorrowful smile. He decided to help, but not by confronting Mr. Dalton directly. Instead, he proposed a plan. That night, Henry quietly left the house, unaware that Andrew had been secretly following him from a distance. When Henry arrived at the meeting point, a large truck was parked on the roadside. Two men were waiting, their faces cold and their eyes sharp like blades. They handed Henry a large bag. "You need to leave immediately. Remember, don't open the bag and don't ask any questions." Henry nodded, taking the bag without a word. He climbed onto his old motorcycle, ready to depart, when Andrew suddenly burst out of the shadows. "Henry, you can't do this!" Andrew shouted, stepping in front of the bike. "Go home, Andrew. This has nothing to do with you." Henry roared, his eyes bloodshot with frustration. "No, I won't let you destroy your life. If you go, I'll follow you." The men standing by the truck began to lose patience. One of them barked, "What's going on here? Are you doing this or not?" Looking at his younger brother, Henry felt torn apart. He knew that if he went ahead, Andrew wouldn't back down, and that could put them both in danger. But if he turned back, he had no way to pay off the debt. At that moment, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Flashing lights illuminated the entire road. The men immediately abandoned the bag and fled. Henry stood frozen, his heart pounding. From the police car, Mr. Thompson stepped out alongside two officers. He looked at Henry and said, "You still have a chance to turn back, but if you take one more step, it'll all be over." Andrew looked at Mr. Thompson, tears streaming down his face. Mr. Thompson had secretly alerted the police and devised a plan to intercept the deal. The men involved were arrested and the bag was open. Inside were illegal drugs. If Henry had carried out the delivery, he wouldn't just have lost the house, he would have lost his freedom as well. Although Henry wasn't arrested, the debt to Mr. Dalton still loomed. Knowing how ruthless Dalton could be, Mr. Thompson decided to intervene. Using his influence, he negotiated with Dalton to reduce the interest and extend the repayment period. However, in return, Henry had to sell the house to cover part of the debt. Henry agreed, though it broke his heart. The small house where the brothers had grown up was now only a memory. "I'm sorry, Andrew. I promised to protect you, but I've made so many mistakes," Henry said, his voice trembling. "No, Henry. As long as we have each other, we can start over," Andrew replied, his eyes shining with hope. After settling the debt, the brothers moved to the city to start anew. Henry took on labor jobs while Andrew continued his studies. Though life was difficult, they no longer felt the despair they once did. Time passed and Andrew graduated from college with top honors and secured a stable job. With his first paycheck, he bought a gift for his brother, a notebook. On the first page, he had written, "You are my greatest pride. Thank you for braving countless hardships to bring me here." Henry smiled, and for the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of relief. Life is not always fair, but sacrifice and genuine love can help people overcome any adversity. Henry and Andrew had lost much, but they held on to the most precious things: their bond as brothers and their faith in a brighter tomorrow. If the story, "Brother Overcame 1,000 Thorns," has touched your heart, please help us spread these meaningful and emotional messages to more people. We do not just tell stories, but also want to bring empathy, hope, and inspiration to everyone. To do that, your support is the greatest motivation. Please support our channel by like the video or article if you find this story meaningful. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Share the story with friends and relatives to spread good values. Thank you for accompanying us, and don't forget that you can also become a source of inspiration for someone through ordinary but extraordinary stories like this.